Remember those old Betty Crocker sandwich recipes no one makes anymore? They once turned the simplest ingredients into quirky, thrifty meals everyone knew. If we forget them now, what slice of our food story gets lost? Olive nut sandwiches were one of those quirky mid-century creations that managed to feel elegant despite their simplicity. Chopped green olives were mixed into softened cream cheese, and then walnuts or pecans were stirred in to add a crunchy texture. Spread thickly between slices of white bread, the filling was salty, creamy, and nutty all at once. Housewives served these at bridge parties, luncheons, and other social gatherings, often trimming the crusts and cutting the sandwiches into neat finger shapes. They were inexpensive to make but looked polished, turning pantry staples into something memorable. Adults enjoyed the bold flavor, though children often wrinkled their noses at the briny taste. The sandwiches stored well in the refrigerator, which made them convenient for events where food needed to be prepared in advance. Though they fell out of favor as tastes shifted, olive nut sandwiches once symbolized thrift, novelty, and Betty Crocker's flair for creative pairings. Prune and cream cheese sandwiches were one of Betty Crocker's unusual but practical recipes that found surprising popularity. Softened dried prunes were mashed and blended with cream cheese to form a spread that was sweet, tangy, and smooth. Spread onto white bread, sometimes with an extra sprinkle of sugar, the mixture became both indulgent and thrifty. These sandwiches appeared often at tea tables, school lunches, or women's club meetings where finger sandwiches were expected. Prunes were widely promoted in mid-century America for their nutritional value and digestive benefits, so the pairing with cream cheese gave them new appeal. Housewives appreciated how affordable and effortless they were, requiring no cooking and only a handful of ingredients. Children liked the sweetness, while adults enjoyed the balance of flavors. Though they are rarely remembered today, prune and cream cheese sandwiches once stood out as a clever way to turn dried fruit into something fun, portable, and satisfying. Pineapple and cottage cheese sandwiches added a sweet, tropical note to the mid-century lunch table. Canned pineapple rings or tidbits were layered with cottage cheese on slices of soft bread, sometimes with lettuce for freshness or butter to prevent sogginess. The combination was creamy, tangy, and lightly sweet, offering a refreshing alternative to heavier meat-based sandwiches. These sandwiches often appeared at luncheons, teas, or church socials, where canned fruit was seen as both modern and sophisticated. Housewives liked them because they were quick, inexpensive, and provided nourishment without much effort. Canned pineapple was easy to keep in the pantry, and cottage cheese was promoted as a wholesome dairy product. Children sometimes enjoyed the sweetness, though adults were more drawn to the novelty of the pairing. Pineapple and cottage cheese sandwiches reflected the era's fascination with canned goods and simple recipes that still looked special. Though forgotten today, they remain an example of Betty Crocker's adventurous, thrifty approach to everyday meals. Peanut butter and watercress sandwiches were one of those quirky combinations that only the mid-century could truly embrace. Thick spreads of creamy peanut butter were layered onto soft bread, then topped with fresh watercress leaves. The peppery greens added sharpness, cutting through the richness of the peanut butter and making the sandwich both surprising and refreshing. Betty Crocker promoted it as a nutritious option, especially for children, since it paired protein with a leafy vegetable. At a time when mothers were encouraged to sneak greens into meals wherever possible, this recipe seemed clever. The sandwich was inexpensive, easy to prepare, and different enough to feel special in a school lunchbox or picnic basket. Adults often served them at luncheons alongside fruit cups, where the unusual pairing sparked conversation. While it may sound strange today, it reflected the era's spirit of experimentation and practicality. Peanut butter and watercress sandwiches vanished as tastes shifted toward sweeter or heartier fare, but they stand as an example of how inventive Betty Crocker recipes encouraged families to make do with what they had. Tomato aspic sandwiches were among the most unusual entries in Betty Crocker's mid-century repertoire. Tomato juice was mixed with gelatin, seasoned with vinegar, salt, and spices, and then chilled until firm. The resulting tomato aspic was sliced into neat squares and layered onto buttered bread, sometimes with a leaf of lettuce for presentation. These sandwiches were popular at luncheons, teas, and church socials, where their bright red color made them look festive. The flavor was tangy and savory, almost like a cold tomato salad, though the gelatin texture made them divisive. Housewives appreciated them because they were inexpensive, could be prepared in advance, and fit into the gelatin craze of the era. Tomato aspic sandwiches reflected the culture of thrift, creativity, and experimentation that defined much of mid-century cooking. They were unusual but memorable, showing how Betty Crocker recipes often blended practicality with novelty. While gelatin-based dishes have fallen out of favor today, tomato aspic sandwiches once stood proudly on tables as a symbol of refinement and clever homemaking. Date and nut sandwiches were a sweet and hearty treat that carried strong ties to tea parties and afternoon luncheons. Chopped dates were mixed with walnuts or pecans, often bound with cream cheese or butter to create a spreadable filling. This mixture was layered thickly onto bread, sometimes whole wheat but often plain white, and cut into neat rectangles or finger sandwiches. The flavor was rich and sweet, with the nuts adding crunch and balance to the sticky dates. These sandwiches were common at ladies' gatherings, where they were considered refined yet simple to prepare. Housewives valued them for their thrift and nutrition, since dates were inexpensive and nuts were filling. They also stored well, making them practical for events where food had to be prepared ahead of time. The recipe reflected Betty Crocker's ability to turn pantry staples into something that felt indulgent. While they are rarely made today, date and nut sandwiches once carried both comfort and elegance, symbolizing a generation of home cooks who prized resourcefulness and tradition. Sardine and egg spread sandwiches were a thrifty and protein-packed option that fit perfectly into the mid-century spirit of making much from little. Canned sardines were mashed together with hard-boiled eggs, mayonnaise, and seasoning until they formed a smooth, savory spread. This was then slathered onto bread, sometimes with lettuce for freshness. The flavor was bold, salty, and satisfying, making it popular in households where meat was expensive or unavailable. Sardines were cheap and nutritious, packed with protein and calcium, while eggs stretched the filling further. These sandwiches were common in working families' lunchboxes, providing sustenance through long hours. They also appeared at potlucks or picnics, where the spread could be made ahead and kept cool until served. While not as glamorous as other recipes, sardine and egg spread sandwiches were practical, nourishing, and firmly tied to the thrift of the era. Today, they are largely forgotten, but they reflect the resilience and resourcefulness of Betty Crocker recipes during mid-century America. Cucumber and peanut butter sandwiches were one of Betty Crocker's more curious creations, but they had their place in mid-century kitchens. Crisp cucumber slices were layered over creamy peanut butter on soft bread, creating a balance of crunch, freshness, and richness. The combination may sound unusual today, but it was once promoted as both refreshing and nourishing. The sandwich was inexpensive, easy to prepare, and offered more protein than a plain cucumber sandwich. Children often encountered them in lunchboxes, while adults served them at casual luncheons or picnics. The cool cucumbers cut through the heavy peanut butter, making each bite feel balanced despite the odd pairing. Housewives valued the recipe because it used ingredients that were always on hand and required no cooking. It reflected the experimental spirit of the era, where even sandwiches became a canvas for mixing textures and flavors. Though it has faded from memory, the cucumber and peanut butter sandwich once carried the Betty Crocker promise of thrift, creativity, and a touch of novelty. Pineapple and ham salad sandwiches were a way to combine thrift and festivity into one mid-century lunch. Diced ham was mixed with canned pineapple and mayonnaise, then spooned generously onto soft rolls or slices of white bread. The result was sweet, savory, creamy, and satisfying, making it a popular choice for luncheons, picnics, or even Sunday suppers. Canned pineapple gave it an exotic flair, while ham added protein and substance. The mayonnaise tied everything together, creating a filling that was hearty but still refreshing. These sandwiches reflected the Betty Crocker tendency to use canned goods creatively, turning pantry staples into meals that felt celebratory. They were also practical, since the filling could be made ahead and stored in the refrigerator until needed. Children loved them for their sweetness, while adults appreciated the balance of flavors. Pineapple and ham salad sandwiches may seem dated today, but they once carried a sense of novelty and joy to family tables. They showed how mid-century kitchens blended convenience with imagination. Peanut butter and marshmallow sandwiches were among the sweetest creations to appear in Betty Crocker's booklets, especially popular with children. Fluffy marshmallow creme was spread thickly over bread and topped with peanut butter, creating a gooey, indulgent filling. The result was sticky, sweet, and satisfying, the kind of lunchbox sandwich that felt like a treat rather than a chore. Parents liked them because they were inexpensive and quick to make, needing only pantry staples. Children adored them for their candy-like sweetness, often trading for them at school lunches. These sandwiches reflected the mid-century fascination with marshmallow creme, which was promoted as versatile, modern, and fun. While adults sometimes criticized them for being too sweet, they remained a household favorite because of how easy and comforting they were. Betty Crocker recipes often carried that balance between thrift and joy, and this sandwich embodied the playful side of her cooking style. Though rarely eaten today, peanut butter and marshmallow sandwiches remain a nostalgic memory for those who grew up in that era. Celery and cheese sandwiches were a crunchy mid-century favorite that showed up in countless Betty Crocker booklets and party menus. The filling was made by mixing diced celery into softened American cheese spread, sometimes with a little mayonnaise to make it creamier. This gave the sandwich both crunch and a mild tang, balancing the sharpness of processed cheese with the fresh snap of celery. The mixture was spread generously between soft slices of white bread, then cut into triangles or finger sandwiches for luncheons. Housewives liked the recipe because it was inexpensive, easy to prepare, and felt a little more refined than a plain cheese sandwich. Children often enjoyed the texture, even if celery was not their favorite vegetable, because the cheese masked the stronger flavor. These sandwiches also kept well, making them perfect for picnics or potlucks. They represented a thrifty use of pantry staples during a time when convenience and creativity went hand in hand. Today they are nearly forgotten, but once they symbolized the playful ingenuity of mid-century kitchens that found joy in the simplest combinations. Prune whip sandwiches were one of those tea table surprises that reflected the era's love of turning fruit into unexpected spreads. Prunes were stewed until soft, then whipped into a fluffy mousse-like mixture with sugar and egg whites, giving it a texture somewhere between jam and custard. This sweet filling was spread between buttered slices of bread, usually white or milk bread, and often cut into delicate shapes for serving. They were especially popular at ladies' luncheons, bridal showers, or club meetings, where unusual recipes often impressed guests. The flavor was sweet and slightly tangy, while the texture was light and airy, making them feel more like dessert than lunch. Betty Crocker promoted prune whip sandwiches as a thrifty way to use dried fruit while also adding something novel to the table. Housewives enjoyed them because they could be made ahead of time and served in attractive arrangements. Though prunes have largely fallen out of fashion as a main ingredient, prune whip sandwiches once carried charm, thrift, and novelty, leaving behind a forgotten but fascinating glimpse of mid-century entertaining. Asparagus roll sandwiches were a familiar sight at mid-century luncheons, combining pantry staples with a little creativity. Soft white bread was trimmed of its crusts, spread lightly with mayonnaise, and wrapped around canned asparagus spears into neat rolls. The rolls were sometimes chilled before serving so they would stay firm on the tray, making them convenient for teas and socials. They looked elegant without requiring much time or skill, which made them popular with housewives who needed to entertain on a budget. Canned asparagus kept the recipe available year-round, and the bread and mayonnaise softened its sharp flavor. Children often avoided them, but adults found them charming, especially when served alongside dainty cakes or cookies. They fit perfectly into Betty Crocker's idea of recipes that made gatherings feel festive, even with limited ingredients. Today, asparagus roll sandwiches have disappeared, but once they were a clever way to turn ordinary food into entertaining fare. Date and orange butter sandwiches were one of Betty Crocker's sweet, thrifty inventions that brought elegance to the lunch table. Finely chopped dates were blended into softened butter, then brightened with orange zest or juice for a fragrant spread. Smoothed generously onto bread, the filling was rich, sweet, and citrusy, a pairing that felt unusual yet refined. At teas, socials, and luncheons, the sandwiches were often trimmed into neat fingers or circles, creating both flavor and presentation appeal. Housewives appreciated the recipe because it used inexpensive pantry items but produced results that seemed special. Children liked the sweetness, while adults admired the citrus balance that kept it from being too heavy. The sandwiches reflected mid-century trends of fruit-based spreads, which allowed small amounts of ingredients to stretch across large groups. They could also be prepared ahead and stored, making them practical as well as pretty. Though forgotten now, they once represented ingenuity and charm. Pineapple and cream cheese sandwiches reflected the mid-century taste for creative uses of canned fruit. Pineapple chunks or tidbits were drained and folded into whipped cream cheese, creating a filling that was tangy, creamy, and lightly sweet. Spread between slices of raisin bread, the sandwich carried both richness and a playful tropical touch. It appeared often at luncheons, parties, and teas where the combination of fruit and dairy felt novel. Housewives liked it because it was affordable, used shelf-stable canned goods, and looked cheerful on a plate. Children were often drawn to it because the pineapple made the cream cheese taste like a dessert filling instead of something savory. Served chilled, the sandwiches also traveled well for picnics and gatherings. They were a thrifty but imaginative use of common staples, and they highlighted Betty Crocker's emphasis on making food fun. Pineapple and cream cheese sandwiches have faded away, but they once symbolized thrift and celebration. Egg and olive sandwiches became a dependable option in many mid-century households, known for being inexpensive yet filling. Hard-boiled eggs were chopped and mixed with sliced green olives and mayonnaise, creating a savory and tangy spread. Spread onto white or wheat bread, the mixture delivered a flavor that was unique, briny, and satisfying. Housewives liked the recipe because eggs stretched easily and olives added variety without costing much. The sandwiches could be prepared quickly in large batches, making them useful for school lunches, picnics, or church socials. Adults enjoyed the strong taste, while children were sometimes less enthusiastic, often picking out the olives. Still, the combination reflected the Betty Crocker approach of using what was available in creative ways to create balance and nutrition. Cheap, easy, and practical, these sandwiches made good use of basic pantry staples. Though they are rarely eaten today, egg and olive sandwiches once represented thrift and practicality. Peanut butter and pickle sandwiches were among the most surprising of Betty Crocker's promoted recipes, yet they developed a loyal following. Creamy or crunchy peanut butter was spread generously on bread, then layered with sliced dill pickles for a combination that was salty, tangy, and nutty. At first glance, the pairing seemed odd, but the crunch of the pickles and the richness of the peanut butter created a strangely satisfying balance. Housewives liked them because they required no cooking and used only pantry staples, making them thrifty and quick. Children sometimes resisted, but adventurous eaters often came to love them for their bold flavor. The sandwich represented the mid-century taste for unusual but practical recipes that could stretch ingredients and surprise the table. It also reflected Betty Crocker's knack for suggesting pairings that were as thrifty as they were memorable. Peanut butter and pickle sandwiches have all but vanished from modern lunch tables, but they once symbolized the daring and experimental side of mid-century cooking. They remain a curious footnote in the story of America's thriftiest sandwiches. Banana and mayonnaise sandwiches were a Depression-era creation that lingered into Betty Crocker's mid-century guides, carried by thrift and habit. Slices of ripe banana were laid between bread spread with mayonnaise, creating a combination that was creamy, tangy, and sweet. Sometimes a sprinkle of sugar or cinnamon was added, but the basic recipe remained plain and simple. Families liked the sandwich because it was filling, inexpensive, and relied on ingredients that were always on hand. During lean times, it provided quick energy and nourishment without the need for meat or expensive extras. By the mid-century, it had become a nostalgic recipe that older generations continued to prepare. Children often loved the sweetness, while adults accepted it as a reminder of harder times. Though unusual by today's standards, banana and mayonnaise sandwiches represented the resilience and creativity of kitchens that refused to go hungry. They reflected Betty Crocker's recognition of recipes that carried both history and thrift. Today, they are more remembered as curiosities, but once they were a dependable staple. Carrot and raisin sandwiches reflected the mid-century fascination with vegetables turned into unexpected fillings. Grated carrots were mixed with raisins and mayonnaise, then spread onto slices of white bread for a sandwich that was both sweet and savory. The carrots provided crunch and freshness, while the raisins added bursts of sweetness that contrasted with the creamy mayonnaise. These sandwiches were popular for children's lunches, where they were promoted as a sneaky way to get vegetables onto the table. Housewives liked them because they were inexpensive, colorful, and practical, making use of ingredients that were almost always available. At teas or socials, they added variety to trays of finger sandwiches, standing out for their unusual combination. The recipe reflected Betty Crocker's encouragement of thrift and creativity, where even simple vegetables could become part of something special. Though carrot and raisin sandwiches are rarely made today, they once carried both practicality and charm, leaving behind a forgotten but fascinating glimpse of mid-century lunch culture. Fruit cocktail salad sandwiches were another example of turning canned goods into playful and thrifty recipes. Canned fruit cocktail was drained and mixed with softened cream cheese, creating a spread that was both sweet and creamy. This filling was spread onto white bread or rolls, often with the addition of chopped nuts for texture. The sandwiches were served at teas, luncheons, or children's parties, where their colorful filling made them visually appealing. Housewives appreciated them because they were inexpensive, easy to prepare, and made good use of canned fruit that was always on hand. Children enjoyed the sweet flavor and bright colors, while adults valued their novelty on a party tray. The recipe reflected the mid-century enthusiasm for canned fruit and dairy, both staples of the time. Fruit cocktail salad sandwiches have faded from memory today, but they once represented the joy of taking simple ingredients and making them feel festive. They symbolized Betty Crocker's playful side, where thrifty recipes could still bring delight. Forgotten now, they remain a curious reminder of mid-century ingenuity. Apple and cheese sandwiches were once a simple but clever Betty Crocker lunch suggestion that balanced crisp freshness with hearty comfort. Thin slices of tart apple were layered between bread with cheddar cheese, sometimes lightly toasted to bring the flavors together. The contrast of sweet apple and salty cheese made the sandwich memorable, and the crunch of fruit added texture that plain cheese sandwiches lacked. Housewives liked it because it used everyday ingredients yet still felt creative, and it fit neatly into the trend of fruit and dairy combinations that filled mid-century cookbooks. Children often enjoyed the sweetness, while adults appreciated how satisfying the pairing could be without any meat. It was also a thrifty recipe since apples and cheese were accessible staples that could stretch across many meals. Apple and cheese sandwiches reflected the Betty Crocker idea that lunches could be practical, wholesome, and still carry a touch of novelty. Today, the pairing survives in snack trays, but the sandwich form has nearly disappeared. Pimento cheese sandwiches were once one of Betty Crocker's proudest mid-century staples, appearing again and again in booklets and pamphlets. The spread was made with shredded cheddar, diced pimentos, and mayonnaise, creating a mixture that was creamy, tangy, and colorful. Spread between slices of soft white bread or tucked into rolls, it became a dependable filler for luncheons, picnics, and children's school meals. Housewives valued it because it was inexpensive, easy to prepare in large batches, and looked cheerful on a party tray. The red flecks of pimento gave the sandwich a festive look, making it stand out against plainer offerings. Children enjoyed it as a mild, cheesy treat, while adults liked its sharpness balanced with creaminess. The recipe spread across the South especially, becoming a signature of both home kitchens and community gatherings. Betty Crocker promoted it heavily as a thrifty lunch solution, and for decades it was a household favorite. Today, it is remembered fondly but rarely made in its original form. Liverwurst and pickle sandwiches were an old-fashioned favorite that Betty Crocker helped popularize through her lunch menus. Sliced liverwurst, rich and savory, was layered onto rye bread and topped with chopped dill pickles for tang. The pairing balanced the strong flavor of liver sausage with the sharp bite of pickle, creating a combination that was both hearty and refreshing. It was often recommended for men's lunches or quick family suppers since it was filling and easy to prepare. Housewives liked it because liverwurst was affordable and available in most grocery stores, while pickles were pantry staples. Though the taste was bold, many appreciated it as a thrifty protein source at a time when meat could still be costly. Children often avoided it, but adults treated it as a reliable choice for a substantial sandwich. Betty Crocker presented it as practical, efficient, and nourishing, even if it was not glamorous. Today, it has faded almost completely from tables, but it once represented thrift and tradition. Pineapple upside-down sandwich spread was Betty Crocker's playful attempt to capture the charm of a cake in the form of a sandwich filling. Canned pineapple was chopped fine, blended with bright maraschino cherries, and folded into cream cheese or a whipped spread to hold it together. The result was a sweet, colorful mixture that stood out on trays at teas, luncheons, and social gatherings. Housewives appreciated how it transformed everyday pantry staples into something festive and fun without much cost or effort. The sweetness made it popular with children, while adults admired its novelty and its striking appearance. Spread on white or raisin bread, it carried the same celebratory spirit as its cake inspiration, though presented in a more practical format. Though today it may seem like an odd idea, in its time, pineapple upside-down sandwich spread reflected mid-century creativity, thrift, and a love of playful cooking. Beet and cream cheese sandwiches were one of the brightest entries in Betty Crocker's collection, remembered for their eye-catching color. Minced canned beets were stirred into softened cream cheese, producing a vivid pink spread that felt festive as well as thrifty. Smoothed between slices of white or wheat bread, these sandwiches were often cut into triangles or rounds and served at teas or luncheons. Housewives liked the recipe because it was inexpensive, kept well when chilled, and could be made ahead for gatherings. While children were not always convinced by the unusual flavor, adults appreciated the tang of cream cheese paired with the earthy sweetness of beets. Garnishes like parsley sprigs or lettuce leaves were sometimes added for presentation, making the sandwiches look as striking as they tasted. Though forgotten today, beet and cream cheese sandwiches once captured the Betty Crocker ideal of turning canned goods into dishes that were practical, pretty, and surprisingly popular. Cabbage slaw sandwiches were a thrifty summer recipe Betty Crocker promoted as both refreshing and practical for busy households. Shredded cabbage and carrots mixed with mayonnaise were tucked into soft rolls or slices of bread, creating a creamy, crunchy, and tangy filling. The texture offered a welcome contrast to heavier meat-filled lunches, making it a popular option on hot days. Housewives relied on the recipe because cabbage was inexpensive, easy to find year-round, and simple to stretch into meals that fed many mouths. Coleslaw kept well in the refrigerator, which made the sandwiches perfect for picnics, potlucks, and outdoor gatherings. Children enjoyed the creamy crunch, while adults valued its lightness during summer heat. It also reflected Betty Crocker's effort to highlight vegetables not as sides, but as the main attraction in thrifty cooking. Though they are rarely remembered today, cabbage slaw sandwiches once represented ingenuity and seasonal comfort on the mid-century table. Peanut butter and bacon sandwiches were a bold combination that Betty Crocker guides introduced as a post-war treat, balancing thrift and indulgence. Creamy peanut butter was spread thickly on bread and topped with strips of crisp fried bacon, producing a salty, sweet blend that surprised many with how well it worked. Housewives liked the recipe because it used familiar staples that were inexpensive and filling while still feeling new and satisfying. The sandwiches required little effort to prepare, yet delivered a big impact in both flavor and heartiness, making them popular for quick lunches or snacks. Children enjoyed the bold mix of sweet and savory, while adults admired how the richness of peanut butter paired with the crunch of bacon. The recipe reflected the post-war shift toward abundance, when bacon was easier to find and peanut butter remained a pantry standard. Though rarely served today, peanut butter and bacon sandwiches once captured Betty Crocker's spirit of creative experimentation. Apple butter and cream cheese sandwiches were one of Betty Crocker's more nostalgic combinations, blending tangy creaminess with the sweetness of spiced fruit spread. The filling was made by layering smooth cream cheese with apple butter on slices of wheat or white bread, creating something simple yet comforting. The result was fragrant, sweet, and tangy, often reminding families of autumn flavors and homemade preserves. Housewives appreciated it because apple butter was inexpensive, easy to store, and often made at home, while cream cheese added richness. The sandwich worked well in many settings, from school lunches to tea trays or even light suppers. Children enjoyed its sweetness, while adults valued the sense of tradition in its spiced apple flavor. Though rarely seen today, apple butter and cream cheese sandwiches once reflected thrift, seasonality, and a touch of indulgence, showing how Betty Crocker elevated everyday ingredients into meals that carried memory and charm. Tomato and cottage cheese sandwiches were a thrifty and wholesome Betty Crocker idea that turned simple staples into filling lunches. Thick slices of ripe tomato were layered on bread spread with seasoned cottage cheese, sometimes with just a sprinkle of salt or pepper. The flavor was light, fresh, and tangy, offering protein and satisfaction without relying on meat. Housewives liked the recipe because it was affordable, quick to prepare, and provided a refreshing alternative to heavier sandwiches. Adults appreciated its mild taste and colorful presentation, especially during warm summer months. Children were less enthusiastic, but the sandwich still held a place in kitchens as a practical, balanced option. It reflected mid-century emphasis on dairy as both thrifty and healthful, aligning with Betty Crocker's message of nutritious yet simple meals. Though forgotten today, tomato and cottage cheese sandwiches once stood as a resourceful lunch idea rooted in everyday ingredients. Frosted sandwich loaves were one of the most dramatic recipes in Betty Crocker's mid-century collections, created to impress guests at luncheons, showers, or holidays. Several layers of sandwiches, often ham salad, chicken salad, or egg salad, were stacked and then frosted entirely with whipped cream cheese or similar spreads. The finished loaf was decorated with parsley, olives, or even piped embellishments, resembling a festive cake. Housewives loved these loaves because they transformed ordinary ingredients into a showpiece that looked elegant without being costly. The recipe reflected a time when presentation was central to entertaining, and hosts wanted dishes that made people talk. Adults admired the novelty, while children were usually fascinated by its cake-like appearance. Frosted sandwich loaves symbolized abundance and creativity, proving that thrift did not have to look plain. Today they are remembered more as curiosities, but they once represented Betty Crocker's talent for turning sandwiches into dazzling centerpieces. Among the unlikely culinary heroes of the Great Depression was a sandwich featuring sliced tomatoes sprinkled lightly with sugar, the tomato and sugar sandwich. Tomatoes, easy to grow and abundant in backyard gardens, were embraced as a budget-friendly food staple during hard economic times. This sandwich cleverly paired the natural acidity of ripe tomatoes with a touch of sweetness, making them appealing enough even for skeptical children. Surprisingly, sugar, though carefully rationed, was frequently recommended in 1930s homemaking guides as a versatile flavor enhancer, transforming humble ingredients into tastier meals. Newspapers even promoted tomatoes as the perfect vegetable for cash-strapped families, humorously dubbing them "poor man's oranges" due to their vibrant color and juicy interior. Combining tomatoes and sugar wasn't just a quirky experiment, it was practical ingenuity. Sweetening tomatoes masked their tartness, giving them broader culinary appeal and preventing precious produce from going to waste. Modern taste buds might initially find the concept puzzling. After all, tomato sandwiches traditionally call for mayonnaise and salt, but Depression-era cooks weren't afraid to rewrite culinary rules if it meant saving pennies. Liverwurst might not be everyone's cup of tea, but for those who loved it, there was nothing quite like a Liverwurst sandwich. So, Liverwurst, or liver sausage, has German roots and is a staple in many European countries. The name Liverwurst comes from the German words Leber, which means liver, and Wurst, which means sausage. This one was also made with rye bread and was a common street food in the streets of New York. Grandma gave it a home-like feel by using homemade bread and using fresh veggies and toppings like mustard, pickles, or onions. Grandma knew that Liverwurst sandwiches were a bit of a specialty, something that not everyone would appreciate. But for those who did, it was a real treat. The Elvis sandwich is more than just a quirky snack. It's a piece of pop culture history. Legend has it, Elvis Presley adored this decadent combination: peanut butter, ripe banana, and crispy bacon layered between slices of white bread. Some say it must be pan-fried in butter until golden and melty. Others swear by the raw version, eaten cold in the dead of night. Either way, it's not exactly health food, it's more of a fever dream. This sandwich is sweet, salty, creamy, and crunchy all at once, much like the king himself. It became a symbol of indulgence, a recipe so outrageous it could only belong to someone larger than life. Fans have recreated it for decades, sometimes adding honey, sometimes toasting it, but always treating it like an edible homage. It's not just about flavor, it's about nostalgia, rebellion, and letting your taste buds run wild. The Elvis sandwich is one of those rare things you try once as a joke and then crave when nobody's watching. Just don't ask your doctor what they think about it. Elvis Presley wasn't the only one who loved a peanut butter and bacon sandwich. The combo of crispy, salty bacon and creamy, rich peanut butter created a high-protein, energy-packed sandwich that was a favorite for anyone in need of a quick and filling meal. It's easy to see why this sandwich caught on. It balanced savory and sweet, crunchy and creamy. The bacon gave it that satisfying crunch, while the peanut butter added a smooth richness. It wasn't the healthiest option, but when you're working with a tight budget and even tighter food supplies, it was a treat that gave you the energy to keep going. Not only was this a cheap meal, but it was also indulgent in a way that made you forget about how hard times really were. The combination of these two ingredients might have seemed strange, but it worked, and it worked well. But if you're craving something a little lighter, something that came before the age of bacon and peanut butter, the next sandwich on our list might be just what you need. The mashed potato sandwich is one of those unassuming comfort foods that became a staple for many families during hard times. When there wasn't much in the pantry, leftover mashed potatoes provided a quick and filling solution. The sandwich itself was simple. Just a hearty serving of mashed potatoes spread between two slices of bread. While it might sound basic, the potatoes brought both substance and satisfaction, especially when other food options were limited. The mashed potatoes could be enhanced with black pepper or a drizzle of gravy if you were lucky enough to have it, adding a little extra flavor to what was essentially a very simple dish. The real beauty of the mashed potato sandwich was its versatility. If you had no other ingredients, it could still make a fulfilling meal. It was also a great way to use up leftovers from a previous meal, turning a side dish into the main course. This sandwich wasn't about gourmet flavors or complex ingredients, it was about being resourceful and making the most out of what you had. For many, it was an affordable, easy way to stretch meals further, especially when money was tight. The mashed potato sandwich might not have been the most glamorous option, but it was a meal that served its purpose well. And while it might seem simple, the next sandwich on our list takes leftovers and transforms them into a surprisingly hearty option. Pickles come in pairs with olives, so it is only right to mention cream cheese and olive sandwiches next. Cream cheese was an ingredient that was already a staple in many American homes because of its popularity in desserts around the 1970s. Olives are, well, olives, and if you do not have a bottle always ready to go, you need to reevaluate your grocery shopping list for this month. Mixing the two made both substantially better, like those power-ups Iron Man gets whenever he puts on a bulkier suit. If people felt really fancy, they would put the olives on the stove for a while and have them fried. Not only was it great on its own, but people also did not stop at just frying. Both of them made for really awesome toppings on meat-based sandwiches. We would not mind seeing more olives on our plate today for sure. They are a classic we feel work in any era. The hot brown was what you made when you had leftovers and a little bit of pride. Open-faced, built on a thick slice of toast, then loaded with turkey and bacon. But what made it special was the Mornay sauce. A rich, cheesy bechamel poured over the top and broiled until it bubbled and browned. It came out of Louisville, Kentucky from the Brown Hotel, but it made its way to family tables when there was turkey to use up and dads wanted something more than a cold sandwich. It was warm. It was indulgent. And it felt like dinner, even if it was built from scraps. Some versions added tomato slices, some skipped the broiler. But the essence stayed: meat, cheese, bread, and heat. Working men who came home hungry could make one in 10 minutes. It was not pretty. It did not stack well. But it hit the spot and filled the plate. Sometimes that was all you asked of a meal. In the summer, when tomatoes were in season and fresh produce was at its peak, tomato and sugar sandwiches became a beloved choice. Thick slices of juicy, ripe tomatoes, sprinkled with sugar, were placed between slices of bread. It might sound odd, but the sweetness of the sugar balanced the tang of the tomatoes, making it an unexpectedly delicious combo. Some people even added a little mayonnaise to the mix for extra creaminess. This sandwich became a perfect treat, often eaten barefoot on the porch in the warmth of summer. It was simple and sweet, a perfect way to enjoy the bounty of the season without spending much. While it was certainly a summertime favorite, this combo is one of those meals that people today may never quite understand. But if you think this sweet and savory duo is odd, the next sandwich is even more unconventional. Ham and banana sandwiches are less digestible both literally and figuratively than most of the list, but they actually worked quite well. The trick was in how you sliced them, because if the banana slices were fat and thick while the ham was thin, you would have a really overly sweet sandwich. Meanwhile, if you did the opposite, then you would have a mushy sandwich that did not have any real flavor. If you did get the proportions right, and most people did after their first few tries, then you had a 70s DIY delicacy with simple ingredients. It made sense why most people did not know how to make a good one, because it was not common. People who lived in other decades hated fruit and meat mixes of savory dishes, but they had a lot more room to make an impression with the crowd in the 70s. Maybe people felt very tropical for a decade? The sandwich would be quite an interesting addition in menus today. Spam and pineapple sandwiches, on the other hand, are a Hawaiian invention that makes some stomachs less audible. On the other hand, if you are anything like us, then maybe the blend of spices, fruits, and canned pork and ham will create a unique flavor trip for you. Spam and pineapple sandwiches in the state of Hawaii would usually be accompanied with things like mango slices or mango chutney, peppers, chili pastes, and fresh coleslaw. All of this really elevated the dish and gave it a strong identity to pull from when it was making impressions on people for the first time in the 70s, and most were good ones. While pineapples are eternally hated in America, this is one mix of different foods that a lot of citizens could get in line for, and that is why we are sad to see this one gone. In a time when food waste was practically unthinkable, even potato scraps found their way onto dinner tables as an ingenious sandwich filling known as the fried potato peel sandwich. During the Great Depression, resourcefulness wasn't just admired, it was essential for survival. Potato peels, typically discarded today without a second glance, became the surprise stars of family meals when frugal cooks discovered that frying them crisp and sprinkling a touch of salt transformed kitchen waste into an affordable delicacy. Potatoes were abundant, inexpensive, and nutritious, making them a cornerstone of Depression-era cooking. Yet their peels often held valuable nutrients, something homemakers recognized instinctively, long before modern nutritionists praised potato skins as vitamin-packed. Clever cooks stretched resources by saving these peelings, crisping them to crunchy perfection, and layering them between slices of bread for a sandwich that was satisfying, flavorful, and, importantly, dirt cheap. Remarkably, newspapers and food columns of the 1930s openly suggested frying potato peels to add bulk and nutrition to scarce diets, turning desperation into culinary inspiration. Ribbon sandwiches looked like something from a dollhouse tea party, but they came from a place of real effort. Thin slices of bread were stacked in layers, each with a different filling, maybe egg salad, then ham spread, then cream cheese and olives. Sometimes the bread colors alternated too: white, wheat, rye, stacked in neat rectangles and trimmed of crusts. When sliced, they revealed pastel stripes like a surprise inside. They took time. They took care. And they were usually made by someone who wanted the table to feel special. You found them at showers, receptions, and the occasional work luncheon. They were not filling. They were not practical. But they said something else. They said someone went the extra step. Someone chose charm over calories. For working men, these sandwiches might have appeared only on holidays or community events, but when they did, they left a mark. You might not remember the speech or the decorations, but you remembered the sandwich that looked like a checkerboard. A reminder that even simple ingredients arranged with love could feel fancy. Sometimes, simplicity was the answer when it came to making a meal out of what was available, and the ketchup sandwich was a prime example of that. When food was scarce and the pantry was running low, a ketchup sandwich became a quick, affordable solution. It was as simple as it sounds, just bread and ketchup. It may not seem like much, but for many families, it was a meal that could be thrown together in a matter of minutes, with nothing more than 2 slices of bread and a squeeze of ketchup. There was something comforting about the tangy sweetness of the ketchup paired with the soft, familiar bread, making it a surprisingly satisfying combination. It wasn't about fancy ingredients. It was about making the most out of what you had. If you were lucky and payday wasn't far off, you might even add a Kraft single for a little extra richness, transforming it into a cheese and ketchup sandwich. But in its most basic form, the ketchup sandwich was a testament to the resourcefulness of families making do in tough times. It was a meal that required little preparation but still filled the stomach. This sandwich wasn't about high-end flavors or ingredients. It was about stretching what little you had and getting through the day with a simple, reliable meal. And while the ketchup sandwich was straightforward, it's about to get a little more indulgent with the next sandwich, where the flavor combinations get a bit more interesting. The Scrapple sandwich is exactly what the name suggests: fried slices of scrapple on bread. Traditionally, this sandwich would be sliced and prepared in a skillet, under a thick layer of eggs. It definitely became popular around the Maryland to New York district, but the recipe itself is properly ancient. An 1853 extract from a cookbook advises using pork that wouldn't be suitable for sausage. It was also popular for its health benefits. It can be made in a variety of ways, and some people include crispy cabbage on top and make it into a waffle with mayo. Mix and match and see what works best for you. Maybe you'll find something worth sharing. But for now, the Scrapple sandwich can only be something you create. With its popularity last seen in the mid-1850s, this sandwich is something that we can only find in old extracts now. If you've ever opened a can of sardines, you know it has a distinct, strong flavor, one that isn't for everyone. But during the Great Depression, a canned sardine and mayo sandwich was a common lunch that stretched a tight budget. Sardines were affordable, packed with protein, and could sit on the shelf for ages. They weren't just easy to find, they were easy to store. The fish was mashed up with mayonnaise, often with a little bit of onion for extra bite, then slathered between slices of bread. Though the flavor might have been an acquired taste, it was a filling meal that kept hunger at bay. And with the mayo adding creaminess, it was surprisingly comforting. While sardines may not be the most glamorous fish, they certainly played an important role in feeding families during tough times. You might think this sandwich is a strange mix, but it's actually a great way to get protein when the pantry's running low. And while sardines gave you that fishy flavor, it was about to get a little more sweet and creamy with the next sandwich on our list. In Depression-era America, homemakers learned quickly that flavor often resided in the drippings left in their skillets. Bacon grease, now casually discarded, was prized as liquid gold, giving rise to imaginative dishes like the lettuce and bacon grease sandwich. At first glance, combining crisp lettuce with bacon drippings might seem contradictory, like ordering a diet soda with your large fries, but during the lean 1930s, it made perfect sense. Bacon, when affordable, provided protein, but every precious drop of rendered fat was meticulously saved in kitchen jars for future meals. Lettuce, on the other hand, was a garden-friendly crop, inexpensive and abundant, offering essential freshness and vitamins. Clever cooks of the time combined these humble ingredients, lightly dressing freshly picked lettuce leaves in warm bacon grease, sprinkling them with salt, then sandwiching them between bread slices. Surprisingly delicious, the grease transformed mundane lettuce into something savory and satisfying. Historical cookbooks and government-issued pamphlets frequently promoted bacon fat as an affordable seasoning, suggesting it could practically perform culinary miracles. The Manwich sandwich is what happens when you need dinner in 10 minutes and your pantry has exactly 2 ingredients, a can of Manwich sauce and a pound of ground beef. It's the store-bought shortcut to a sloppy Joe, soaked in sweet, tangy tomato sauce and ready to heap on a hamburger bun. No chopping, no spice rack, no slow simmer, just brown the beef, pour the can, and you're done. In the 70s and 80s, it became a weeknight hero, advertised as, "A sandwich is a sandwich, but a manwich is a meal." It was a dinner-time fix for busy parents, latchkey kids, and anyone with a microwave and a spoon. The smell alone could draw kids out of their bedrooms like moths to a flame. Some added cheese, others pickles or onions, but most just kept it simple. It wasn't glamorous, but it got the job done. Today, it still holds a place in the hearts of those who remember TV trays, linoleum kitchens, and the clink of a can opener on a Tuesday night. The fried bologna and mustard sandwich is one of those classic comfort foods that speaks to simplicity and practicality. A true Southern favorite, this sandwich became a staple in many households during tough times when meat was scarce and budgets were tight. Bologna, a processed meat that was inexpensive and easy to find, was fried until it curled up, creating crispy, golden edges that added texture and flavor to the sandwich. The bologna's richness was perfectly complemented by a generous smear of mustard, which added a tangy zing that cut through the greasy richness of the fried meat. It wasn't a sophisticated meal, but it was satisfying, hearty, and filled you up without costing much. The best part was how easy it was to prepare. A quick fry on the stove and a spread of mustard, and you had yourself a meal in no time. The bologna was affordable and could be bought in bulk, making it a practical choice for families trying to stretch their food dollar. While it may not have been gourmet, the fried bologna and mustard sandwich provided a familiar, comforting taste that many still remember fondly today. It wasn't about fancy ingredients or elaborate cooking methods. It was about making something hearty and satisfying with what was available. And while this classic combo hits the spot, the next sandwich on our list takes another humble ingredient and turns it into something surprisingly delicious. Sliced bananas with mayo on white bread. This banana and mayonnaise sandwich is a bit of a wild card for sure, but keep an open mind because the South definitely does, which is where this interesting creation finds its origins. Typically, a lot of comfort food comes out of the southern USA. As you may have guessed, preparing this is as simple as taking candy from a toddler. Now I know what you're thinking. Bananas and mayo sounds worse than water and oil. However, there's a reason it comes into comfort food. All you need is a sliced banana, 2 slices of fresh bread, and a good spread of mayo. Maybe not the best you'll ever have, but what's the downside? Give this forgotten experiment a try and see if it's up your alley. When grape jelly teamed up with Bologna during the Depression, the combination created more than confusion. It birthed an unexpectedly beloved sandwich, the Bologna and jelly sandwich. At first glance, pairing thinly sliced, inexpensive Bologna meat with sweet grape jelly might seem like a culinary accident, but in the context of 1930s America, it was nothing short of brilliant ingenuity. Bologna was a Depression staple because it stretched meat budgets further than any cut of beef or pork ever could, appearing in kitchens nationwide as the quintessential poor man's steak. Similarly, grape jelly, often homemade from wild or backyard grapes, offered a cheap, sweet contrast readily available in most households. The salty, savory taste of Bologna unexpectedly complemented jelly's sweetness, creating a sandwich quirky enough to please even skeptical palates. Interestingly, early cooking pamphlets and newspapers occasionally endorsed this odd pairing, promoting it as a practical yet flavorful way to diversify Depression-era diets. Far from being merely an oddity, this sandwich underscores how cleverly resourceful our grandparents were, turning modest ingredients into sandwiches both memorable and satisfying. The mayonnaise and lettuce sandwich may seem like an odd combination at first, but it was a simple, satisfying meal for many families during tough times. Before the era of trendy BLTs and elaborate sandwiches, this humble sandwich was a go-to for those looking for something fresh and easy to prepare. Made with crisp iceberg lettuce and creamy mayonnaise, it provided a refreshing crunch and rich flavor, often when other ingredients were too expensive or scarce. Iceberg lettuce was inexpensive and readily available, making it the perfect base for this sandwich. The mayonnaise added a creamy texture, making each bite smooth and comforting. While this sandwich may not have been fancy, it was beloved for its simplicity and the way it brightened up an otherwise basic meal. In times when fresh produce was limited, the lettuce offered a rare dose of green, and the mayo brought a touch of indulgence. It wasn't a sandwich for a gourmet feast, but it was a practical and affordable meal when resources were stretched thin. For many families, the mayonnaise and lettuce sandwich was the only fresh food they could afford. It wasn't about gourmet ingredients or complex flavors. It was about making do with what was available, and it worked. This sandwich served as a reminder of how, sometimes, the simplest meals are the ones that bring comfort. But if you think this sandwich was basic, wait until you see what's next, where the simplicity of the meal gets a little more daring. Throughout the hardships of the Great Depression, creativity in the kitchen became as vital as bread itself, leading to culinary experiments that modern taste buds might find curious. Among these unusual creations was the humble yet surprisingly refreshing cucumber and sugar sandwich. Thinly sliced cucumbers, lightly dusted with sugar, sandwiched between slices of bread. Sugar may seem extravagant for the 1930s, yet households often had small reserves carefully rationed for moments exactly like this, transforming bland cucumbers into something akin to dessert. Garden cucumbers, prolific and hardy, grew abundantly, becoming the unsung heroes of many Depression-era meals. Interestingly, cucumbers were favored because they matured rapidly, providing a dependable source of nutrition when pantry staples were uncertain. Clever homemakers discovered sprinkling sugar over cucumbers masked their watery blandness, turning a simple vegetable sandwich into an affordable treat. Even kids who usually avoided vegetables happily ate it. In fact, this unlikely pairing became popular enough to feature in homemaking pamphlets of the era, billed as a sweet sandwich children would actually finish. The Sloppy Joe was chaotic. Ground beef simmered in a sweet and tangy tomato sauce, scooped onto a hamburger bun. It was never neat, it was never photogenic, but it was honest. Dads made it with a pound of ground beef and whatever was left in the pantry. Ketchup, tomato paste, onions, Worcestershire sauce. Sometimes it was just canned sauce from the store. You spooned it hot onto a bun, and it soaked through before the second bite. It dripped, it stained. You needed a stack of napkins and maybe a fork for the end. But it was warm. It was filling. It was 5 ingredients and 15 minutes from stove to table. For working men, it was dinner that looked like effort but cost very little. Kids liked it, adults tolerated it. Everyone knew it. The Sloppy Joe was not trying to impress, it was trying to feed you. And it did. The loose meat sandwich is like the Sloppy Joe's tidy cousin. It skips the sweet tomato sauce and gets straight to the point. Seasoned ground beef crumbled and piled onto a soft hamburger bun. No binding agent, no fillers, just beefy goodness. Corned beef tongue with mustard in between fluffy bread slices. Okay, beef tongue might be way out of your palate, but don't disregard the corned beef tongue sandwich just yet. For something to fade from history, it's got to cement its spot there first, right? Can't do that if you don't bring something to the table. Perhaps this one will bring a lot more than you'd expect. It's traditionally prepared with carrots, garlic, red pepper, black pepper, salt, onions, mayo, and spice like bell pepper, paprika, and some garnishes like lime and parsley. So we already have the makings of a savory delight. You really want to keep a close eye on the beef tongue while it's in the pot, though. It can alter the flavor or dry it out fast. Though this sandwich has faded into the past now, the intricacy and delicacy through which it was created is a marvel to look back at. Maybe one day, this sandwich will come back at fancy restaurants, but for now, it remains a figment of the past. When the budget was tight and even jam or jelly was out of reach, butter and sugar sandwiches came to the rescue. It was as simple as it sounds: a thick layer of butter spread on white bread, then topped with a generous sprinkle of sugar. For many, this became the go-to treat, especially during the Depression. It was sweet, satisfying, and didn't require much in terms of ingredients. The butter added richness, and the sugar gave it a touch of sweetness, making it feel like a real dessert, even if it was just a way to fill the stomach when times were tough. The best part? It was incredibly cheap to make, and you didn't have to go hunting for expensive ingredients. Families would often have this as a snack or even as a light dessert to end the day. Despite how simple it seems, there's something comforting about its humble sweetness. But as simple as butter and sugar may be, it's about to get even simpler with the next sandwich on our list. Which Old Betty Crocker sandwich would you try? Comment your pick, hit like, and subscribe for more tasty trips down memory lane.